I served in the post 9/11 era.
Most importantly, Jon, you are a father.
Fathers are extremely important and they need to be present. When you're doing a duty that simply cannot allow it, do not regret and regret and regret. It will burn you up.
Would you say this is one of the reasons that led to the divorce?
I was becoming neurotic. If you'd given me your phone number at that point, I would not put it in my phone. I'd have written it down, done some research, checked you were all right.
So why don't I just do a quick intro for Jon, and then we can go straight into some questions. Most importantly, Jon, you are a father. You're about to get married. You've been 23 years in the Army, from which 20 years were in the Special Forces at the SAS. You originally joined for the Parachute Regiment in the late 90s. Whilst you were with the SAS, you had extensive record of high-stake and complex operations globally. Amidst your service, juggling personal tragedies with family, and the pressure from your work led to both physical and psychological challenges, including stress-induced alopecia. All of this shaped your perspective on resilience, what is resilience, and what is mental health. So these are interesting topics to unpack. Since 2021, you've moved on to the tech world. And now your focus is enhancing human performance and health. And you work with companies like NMES, dealing with neuromuscular electrical stimulation, used for performance, recovery, and so on. Breath work, augmenting human biology to be more adaptive and resilient. All right, so the main question actually that I personally struggle with, given all my travels and my work, and how hardly I see my family these days. Let's talk about family and you being a father. And let's talk about when you were serving, how often were you away? How long were you away? How did that affect you as a man? And how did that affect your loved ones?
So first of all, it's an absolute pleasure to be here amongst this community. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Pleasure.
Special Forces life is well known to be almost the epitome of what defines profession that dominates your life, and Special Forces is exactly like that. I served in the post 9/11 era, and we went on to almost continual cycle. Our unit ourselves has permanently deployed soldiers ever since 1998 and still on that sort of cycle. So it brings many challenges. It's like a huge privilege to have done that profession and role, and I have absolutely no regrets looking back over that profession. Served alongside remarkable people, all sharing those same challenges that affected myself and all the others around us. When it comes to family, essentially you have to learn as you go along, and I certainly didn't get it right all the time, but I think what was most important to me was ensuring that I was available to them, and I wasn't always available to them.
How long were you gone? What was the typical?
So it was the tours could range from a number of months through to 8 or 9 months at a time if they got extended. I did do operational posts where they joined me, but it was tremendously tough on their mother, who had young children to look after as well. So even when you go away together, because that's possible, usually it's not. You have this real sense of tension between the two, what your duty is. Yeah. And your duty is to turn up every time. And I always used to say this when I had my team, for the short period that you're a team leader. It's not our job to turn up once, it's our job to turn up each and every time. And we don't know what that entails, but we have to ensure that we turn up. We complete what we've been others done, either hand it off to other people or we return home. And that's the most important part, and ensuring that you don't break in the process, but also break the relationships around you. So you have an outcome that means you're all still together. It won't have been pretty, right? And you have to really, really work hard not to have regrets. I talk about separation. So one of the most notable things I studied in my career that is relevant to why I sit here is I did the hostage negotiation crisis intervention course, and the 4 pillars of what leads to real stress, chronic stress in human beings is bereavement, separation, financial stress and exposure to trauma. And there is no one in this room, no one in the world that won't have a number of those going on at any one time in their lives. And bereavement you cannot see coming, and it challenges you extremely much. So I can come on to my personal experiences with that. But I want to make the point around separation, right? Everyone thinks separation means divorce, relationship breakdown. But it isn't just that. It's when you're doing a profession that requires you to be away. A duty makes it more tough, right? And you do miss the birth of a child. Thankfully, I never did. But there's many, many Christmases. Every other Christmas I was away, right? Every Easter was almost gone. You didn't go to hardly anyone's weddings. And each time that happens, you have to work very, very hard for it not to chip away, not only at you and the centre of what makes you you, but also those people with those relationships are so important with. For me, it was my children, their mother, and some key people around us.
Jon, were you able to talk to them? Reach
Sorry?
out? Were you able to talk to them?
Yeah, I mean, there were exceptional periods where you couldn't.
Okay.
So we deployed on some that were really not supported at all, but that was rather the exception than the rule. But it's, you know, in a sense, and again, you know, I think we're all different people, but we share some similar needs: security, safety, communication, reassurance. You know, and there were many times when, you know, you phoning up, and to be honest with you, it makes the situation worse rather than better when you have a clipped communication. You know, your mind is singularly focused on what you're doing and you're not listening. You know, I'd say I was at my worst in the 30s in being able to manage this. I saw the evidence of it, but as I moved my way through, I did learn to do it better. Still haven't worked it out. I can't claim to do that. They've got an amazing mother, but there's two people that need to be taken into account in this, and that was Nan and Grandma. Now, my parents died quite early. However, their mum's grandparents have been hugely formative in their lives. And so I want to really, really impress upon you that fathers are extremely important and they need to be present. But when you're doing a duty that simply cannot allow it, do not regret and regret and regret. It will burn you up. But what we were able to do is put in mitigating circumstances around it, you know. And to be honest with you,
What do you mean by mitigating?
So mitigating who is important to them, who can take those roles, and those
Hence
people
the grandparents.
the absolutely amazing role they've played in all of the children's upbringing. And I think it would be a very, very different story if we didn't all try and share that. You know, when I was away, people, you know, I'm sure that certain people hated it. But they did present a picture of, do you know what, it's a duty, you've got to do it. I think you've got to put it in words that children understand. Never hide from the truth. Of course, it's not good.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it has to be disastrous.
And may I ask, I know it's going a bit more personal, would you say this is one of the reasons that led to the divorce?
Certainly the job was a huge factor in it. You know, and it's not like we separated lightly. We were together for 17 years, I believe, 3 children. You know, when you look at a relationship, I still see it as an absolute, you know, valuable success in itself. I don't have any regrets over separation. And in 2009, the job had become so uncompromising that children moved back away from me where I was based, which made, you know, I remember we sat down and we said, what does this mean for us? And it says, we will see each other less. Right? And that's because when I'm on a domestic role, I can commute back. When I'm on a deployable role and on certain notice, we have certain notices, we're never off it. It's all part of operator syndrome. But I also used to call it on-call syndrome. You're constantly on standbys, ready to deliver. You know, it's like trying to keep your fighting weight all of the time. It's not possible. Humans will break in the end, right? And essentially we sat down and we wrote on 2 sides of paper the benefits of moving back, being close to family, being around friends, being around communities that are important. And on one glaring point on the other page was the disadvantages of moving back, and that was less time together. And we took that situation, you know, we did it consciously. We talked amongst one another. You know, we didn't do it quickly in 2009, but that was what we decided was best for everybody. And it worked. You know, if we actually look at who's standing up and the children and how they behave, you know, it's definitely not what we would say is the traditional convention of what you should do. But there's reasons, really good reasons, and very strong reasons why. You know, to have a profession that is a duty is an honour to me. And being able to manage it through those years, it was never going to last forever. Being able to manage it through those years took the effort of more than just me. And that was important because we have got people who are happy and developed, and they seem to have been not, you know, there's definitely impact from it. definitely impact. There's a separation that may or may not have happened anyway. What's the point in asking?
Anything you would have done differently if you could?
I've been, when I remember when I was getting it most, there's no right or wrong in any of this, but I know when I was really sort of messing it up. And that's when I was coming back and being completely emotionally inaccessible to the children and to anyone else who's around. And I was closing off. There's lots of physiological reasons why that was, but that was also me. I could have conditioned myself better for that. I think through the maturity of those years and through my own experiences, I was able to get better at that. Yeah. And I think what you see, everyone knows within the forces, they have a high number of people who really, really struggle and become clinical. And what you've got is a conditioned set of emotions that are harnessed and harnessed and harnessed. There people can switch themselves on and switch themselves off. And if you don't know how to switch yourself off, those emotions well until you suddenly leave, and then they burst. And I one of my friends described, he was told that one of his cousins had died. He wasn't particularly close, and all of a sudden he was just overwhelmed with emotion. And that's because if you do these professions and condition yourself so toughly on yourself, it actually has an effect on your brain. And actually you won't be emotionally intelligent with other people outside of that environment you're in. So there is an art to it. Humans are more about art than they are about science. But there's an underlying scientific reason why you will come out emotionally inadequate if you go too fast, too hard. I've always compared these professions, like driving a speedboat, right? And if you get in a speedboat, Special Forces service is like getting in your speedboat and just putting it on full throttle and then driving it through any type of water, against the tide, with the tide, over the waves, under the waves. You've never, ever been sympathetic to the engine at all. And what's more, whatever bow wave you're creating is going to be massive. And if you stop that speedboat too fast, the bow wave is going to crash over the back of the boat. And that's why art and understanding needs to be better at making sure that speedboat is slowing down. Because what happens in life, and as I say, everyone in this room will be bereaved at one point in their life, and we cannot determine when that will happen. You will speed your speedboat up and gradually slow it back down. And your body is actually extremely physiologically resilient if you allow it to be so. But you need help.
Was it a technique? Was it a mental state?
Intuition. I think for me,
you're telling yourself to slow down.
I mean, I had real markers. I had an overall change in behaviour after an unsupported mission where I was surrounded by people I couldn't trust. I was not getting the food I needed. I was getting almost no sleep. And we didn't know when we were coming back. And that lasted and lasted and lasted and lasted. Unsurprisingly, on the back of all of the other operations that were built up. Bearing in mind I had alopecia in 2006, and we'll go into that. I remember I was doing work related in London, and all of a sudden I was becoming neurotic. If you'd given me your phone number at that point, I would not put it in my phone. I'd have written it down, done some research, checked you all right. That I am a trusting person, right? When you meet me, I'm quite trusting. I think that's how you should see the world. That doesn't mean you should be complacent. But the best thing you can do is trust those that you meet. You gain the best relationships, you preserve relationships. And me behaving like that was not myself. And that was me first realising that this was actually a problem. Like neuronal patterns were beginning to be repainted, and they were all negative. And there were periods of time I was choosing isolation. Now what is interesting is the rest of the team, I was actually a TO at the time, and the rest of the team, all they saw...
Team operator?
So team leader. So for a very short period of time, you hold a position called team leader, which is like that's the biggest honour. And you get given that honour for 2 years, and you can have whatever experiences are put in front of you as you go through. There's some staples, but there's a lot of standby stuff that's standing. But when I was behaving like that internally, and I knew I was struggling, right? I knew I was like constantly taking hold and conditioning harder and harder and harder. And I was neurotic. Anyone that was wearing certain electronic things, they were listening. Anyone, why do we have to leave the doors open? Every door should be locked. They could come at us when we're deployed. We're surrounded by people who defend us. No, someone needs to... And so all the team saw was me being overly security aware, which I could easily have said, well, that's just me being responsible. But I knew inside that my behaviour had started to adapt, and that's probably what led to me thinking, I didn't give myself a better diet, a better sleep, but somehow I knew I was starting to spiral. Now, I know people who go over the clinical line. Once they're medicated, that's dangerous, because it's not trauma that's led to that, which is what the stamp people put on.
So they go over the line, then they get the medication.
Yeah, and what has happened is they've put themselves under unbearable levels of stress, unending levels of stress, duty-bound and personal, whatever, and then that then becomes something they can't solve themselves. You need an intervention. I don't like the thought of medication. Medication is dangerous. And a lot of the time in today's society, they say, oh, trauma. But actually, your body is very good at dealing with trauma. My mum was killed, she was hit by a car when I was in my early 20s.
2004, right?
2004. And I can tell a story around it if you'd let me see. So I was standing in the camp one evening, cold November evening, and I got a call to come to the HQ, my own HQ. And that was only going to ever happen if I was going to get sent away, if I'd done something they didn't like. So I walked in, and when you walk in a building, you can tell from everyone who's looking at you that there's something going on. And I was told my mum had been hit by a car and the injuries are extremely grievous, right? And when you say that to someone, you know what that means. But the reason I'm telling you this is because how it was managed. So obviously at that point, I've gone to pot. My mum was a huge part of my life. When I was growing up, I was extremely close to her, as people are with their mums, and they play an incredibly strong and influential role in your upbringing. Basically I was took to a car, took to a helicopter, and flown directly to be landed on a village green and put into the hands of two very bemused policemen on blue lights, who thought, they've just seen a helicopter land and they thought they'd get someone really significant coming out of it, and all they've got is a very, very upset SAS trooper. Took me straight to the hospital. I met up with my brother and my dad. Within flight, after an hour and 40 minutes of being hit by the car, my mum had been declared dead. So that was a hugely traumatic event in all of our lives. Not just the physical part of what had happened, it's one of those accidents, a tragic accident, but it's also the impact of my mum no longer being there. There was hugely, my dad, been with her for ages, for many decades, and so it was a huge disruption into his life as well. Mm. He was forlorn with grief, but he also really struggled to manage his own life. But incredibly, and it was very complex when Mum died, because it happened at a time when there's lots of things going on in a family, so there's lots of things to do. I deployed quite soon after, and that's what gave me alopecia.
How soon?
Physiological.
Can we ask how?
I can't remember, but it's about 6 weeks, I think.
6 weeks afterwards, you're out?
Yeah, so I would usually have been gone at that point. Now, the point I'm making this is, obviously that's hugely tragic. I came back with alopecia. Yes, I did my job and I was fine for doing my job. It's not like there was a deficit there. Me and my brother talked about how we managed our dad, and we both decided that, the bit that he was never going to get closure with is how it happened with my mum. And we even investigated our own death to try and prove to him that there was no solution to this. This was just
how, as in the actual sequence of how
he was looking for a criminal thing. The lady that hit my mum was 82, and she actually knew her. So it's like one of those things in life that does happen, and they're incredibly intricate in their complexity. Right? You could not put those things together and write them as a story and predict it.
Did your father recover?
My father never recovered. He died 1 year later, and he died of what medical terms is a broken heart, was cardiomyopathy. And essentially he was in this cycle of grief. I deployed.
Sorry, what about you and your brother? How did you, all that pressure, I know you got alopecia, but eventually you came out of that.
Well, this is one of the overall points I want to make. So my brother was a serving paratrooper, a commissioned officer as well, and he did a full and amazing career as well. He handled probate, he helped my dad, he prepared everything he could. I did a lot of the manual things in the backside of getting things ready. But essentially, I think what I find very interesting about that is the trauma of that that event happening. I was over quite quickly, right? That doesn't mean I wasn't sad, doesn't mean I was just not like acknowledged it was tragic forever, but your body is incredibly resilient to dealing with the stress of trauma unless you're like my dad. Like, he was stuck in a loop, it was overwhelming, there was no solution.
Do you think therapy would have helped?
Nothing.
Did he try?
At his age, with what had happened, there was simply nothing. If me and my brother had moved in and lived with him, we could not. So my dad saw my brother quite a bit. I came back off operation. I remember speaking to him on communication like every so often. He had a mobile phone. He was very traditional. So he had a Nokia 2210, and when it went off, he'd sort of gaze at it. And he wasn't used to using mobile technology. He walked a lot. He travelled a lot. And he did lots of stuff. He was trying to solve it all himself, right? Which is not the wrong approach for him. He saw friends. He knew he had support if he wanted it. But ultimately, it was the grief that he was stuck in that was always going to be the greatest risk. And it ended up being the greatest risk. But from my brother and my point of view, and we still talk about what happened to my mum and how much it changed our lives, we had probably dealt with the trauma of it happening within a couple of years. But it affected our lives and still does to this day. And that's the point, is these things will happen. Your physiology is actually more resilient than you give it credit for, but you have to allow it to do its work, right? And there's a great friend of mine who's an expert in this room, could probably do this more justice than me. But there is something within you that is incredible at making sure you're a survivor, but you have to allow it to be more powerful than yourself.
Can you unpack that a bit more? What does that mean? Does that mean acceptance? Is it talking about it?
Acceptance is a big part of it. I mean, when people say, what do you think of the important strengths in life? I think acceptance is huge. There's some things in life you can never see coming. Some things in life you really can't control, no matter, despite how much you try. And acceptance is a huge part of allowing yourself to sit back. There are some physiological reasons why this is. You recue your breathing. There's all sorts of stuff. You must sleep well. You must eat well. These are all well known. If you do none of those, your body will not have the chance to get you through that period. Financial stress is a huge one for us all, right? We live in today's society. It's enormously complex and self-questioning, and it shouldn't be. But it is. And everyone lives with financial stress through. And this is just as dangerous because it's sustaining. And it just loops and loops and loops. This is where, a part of a community, you can draw great strength. I've always thought about it, like, when something happens like that, everyone will be bereaved. Everyone does have financial periods of stress. But if you look at it like a whole experience for a community, whether you're tacitly and deliberately part of one or not, then that's kind of a shared thing. People can't inherit your problems. No one could have inherited the death of my mother. But the way I looked at it is that we were all going to go through this. And I had people that could support me when I did. The way my work acted defines who they are as people. Like, someone took a very consequential decision to use that helicopter. It was rolled for operations. So someone, who I know, made a decision to say, if we can cut 15 seconds off getting him to his father's side, we will do it. And they took that on themselves to put that helicopter burning by the time I got down there. They could not have shaved anything off. So when I turned up at the hospital and I went and saw my mother's body and I looked at my brother and my father and immediately knew life is different forever, of course it was. But definitely the next period was going to be just as traumatic in its impact. I have always remembered that those people did what they did for me. And I thanked them afterwards, many, many years later. And I served alongside them on operations, right? We knew each other as professional colleagues, as friends. We were there if we wanted to. Some of us got on with each other or not. It's a typical community, right? But those values that they had, that in your time of need they would come and help you, has absolutely stayed with me forever.
Yeah, Jon, what I also like hearing here is the acceptance part, to say it's okay to have problems.
Yeah.
We all have problems, whether it's financial, family, or whatever that may be. It's about communicating those problems. It's about accepting those problems and then bit by bit dealing with these. The other message I'm getting from you is, it's what you're saying, it's not resolved straight away. It takes time. So what obviously your grief and your pain took a while to get over. Does the military teach these techniques, or is this something you've picked up yourself?
I think the military doesn't teach these techniques. It's doing a better job of it now. Is one, acknowledging that if you do these sorts of duties, you know, they're going to have outcomes. There's mechanical outcomes like being subjected to explosive blast, being in high stress environments. If I can describe what CQB is like, close quarter battle, it's moving through rooms, moving through different lighting, expecting every threshold, a doorway, a window that could become hostile. And then you add a hostage into that mix that you're responsible for ensuring comes to no harm. You have put your body in an environment where you have no choice but to hold over to your physiology and allow your instincts to do the main work for you. There's a huge part of consciousness, but the main part of that is done in a state where you don't have full control, but some of us are better at it than others. And it's interesting when it comes to stress, you know, the ones that really understand what the risks of a bereavement are like are the ones that will accept help. They will accept support. If they need to, they'll join a community. And through that period, they'll be an active part of that community. It doesn't mean you're not part of that community if you're not particularly active. We're all part of a community. Right? It's an interesting thing about communities. The physical number of the most effective communities is between 50 and 100 people. And if it's called the Dunbar number, it's through study. If it becomes any more over 150, it becomes dysfunctional for you to be amongst. It's hard to manage. It's hard to assimilate. So in areas of communities of about 100 people, that's probably where you're most effective yourself as a human being interacting, whatever you're doing as part of that community. I always find these interesting because I am one of those people who constantly asking why. You know, if I become anxious, but if I become neurotic, if I become, you know, that person I was, the first thing I do is why? Why am I thinking like this? Not like I'm a bad person. I've suddenly become aggressive. I'm very aggressive inside. You know, I had a psychiatric report when I was 13. I couldn't stay at school. That's different. Why is that suddenly presenting itself in the way that it is now? You know, why am I like starting to feel like blaming other people? That's a huge one. You know, within the team, we always look after ourselves first, right? And we look at each other's behaviour. And the moment I see someone who's running into that threshold and they're overly passionate, their ego is driven on them, or they're defensive, or they've got a blame culture against everyone else, I don't think, right, get in my office, you know. I think, okay, what's driving this behaviour? Look in the background. People do not want to admit that they're about to go through a separation with a person they once loved, probably still do love, but it just isn't viable as a relationship anymore.
Yeah, there's a culture of silence amidst men, especially maybe more so for military, right? Tough it up. And
the biggest frightening reality we have, I mean, I had seizures when I was 2014 from explosive blast, is owning up to the fact that your behaviour is changing. You may have become slightly, you know, is your judgment questionable or not? They will take that weapon off you straight away. They will strike you off the operational list. In our community, that is seen as a real embarrassment, a complete failure. And it's really distinct amongst people. But the best thing we can do is look at each other, support each other, and solve our own problems. And people that do have, that's why they managed me when my mum happened. You know, no one brought it to a fore, but I knew they watched me very, very carefully. Yeah. And because my behaviour managed to remain stable, no one was hiding for the reality of it. But I am absolutely sure if I started breaking down, if I started behaving in a way I shouldn't in a professional environment, they would take me straight out of that environment and send me home. The army,
Sorry, John, this is part of the reason why Roger and I created Obsidian, is because we realized that we don't talk as men. I know we've touched on this before, but it is absolutely crucial if you are going through something to be able to reach out to a friend, to connect to others, to open up and just even hint or start the dialogue. I mean, by all means, like, don't let the white belt fool you, right? He's one of the most dangerous people in this room, probably the most dangerous person in the room. But he's opening up, he's talking about it, he's owning the issues and the problems that he himself and the family have gone through. And that's noble, that's strength.
Yeah. I think you've just tipped on something really, really important. Is yes, I can be dangerous. Yes, I can switch it on and I can choose to switch it off. But that's a really key point. Is be dangerous when you need to be. When someone requires you to be, then step into those shoes. But don't live in that aura. Don't be fighting fit all the time. It's not possible. You know, don't be on call every single time.
Yeah.
It's not possible, right? And that's a really, really important point, is when you feel like you're having to cover something because there's a pride issue, because there's a professional issue, you're probably stepping into dangerous ground, right? If you feel like your ego is driving you to prove something, you've probably stepping into dangerous ground. And that's not something, you can only get that by being part of a community.
But there's a level of self-assessment that you kept talking about, referring to, which is brilliant. Because I find a lot of us are on autopilot. We just keep going, and without asking, why am I like this? Why is that person like that? And that ability to step outside yourself and say, what's going on with me? What else do I need to adjust is vital.
If you can do that before someone else has noticed it, like my team said, why are you so security aware? You're kind of driving us mad. Like, we don't believe someone should have to sit on a roof all night watching out.
Did you put like broken glass on the door in the hotel room and do all that stuff?
Yeah, I was out there myself, yeah.
You were one of those.
There's no one coming near us. No. If someone notices your behaviour before you've acknowledged it yourself, you're probably quite a few leaps down the line, right? It doesn't mean everything can be reversed. Everything can be ameliorated. But as soon as someone else starts saying, you know, why are you so defensive? Why have these are the hints that your neuronal patterns aren't healthy anymore. You know, and if they continue that trend, again, having studied on the hostage negotiation crisis intervention course, and now have had the pleasure of I've got a great friend in the audience and other experts who understand about neuroscience, you realise that if you repeat a negative behaviour, it becomes entrenched. And your thought patterns become closer and more isolated. Yeah. And as soon as you take yourself away from people, no one's your compass anymore.
I'm seeing this with my kids. Making sure they're repeating the correct behavior, because again, I've seen some things that get entrenched, and now we're trying to get them away from those. Yeah,
it's really, really interesting. So some of the techniques we learnt today, one of them was getting back up from a defensive position. You know, and from working with these experts, I also understand how the brain acknowledges. And there's a certain science towards a movement through 4 neuromuscular junctions. And in evolutionary biology, your brain that's locked up in its dark cavern goes, okay, well, I recognise this, and it's getting repeated, and therefore it's beneficial. In your synapse, you've got your dendrites, and then you've got axon that communicates a signal, and you've got a myelinated sheath. It's a fatness substance that conducts that signal and makes it stronger and stronger. Because your brain goes, I've just learnt that, and I'm just recognising you keep doing it, so I'm going to reinforce that and make sure it's the strongest signal as possible. Behaviours are exactly the same. And if you have a really, really challenging experience that is driving you into a negative thought process, you will need other people to unpick it if you can't do it yourself. And actually, medication, I don't believe, is the right answer. It might buy you a bit of space. I think it's interaction with other people that absolutely joining a community, you know. And you mentioned the importance of faith. You know, the importance of being part of a tribe, the importance of doing a physical activity amongst others. These are all got science-backed theories, but they're far, far more stronger than that. You know, they're age-old human ways of having dealt with this.
Can I ask a couple of questions? You just mentioned faith. For someone like you, who's seen evil as it is out there, and what is your faith stance?
So I come from a Christian background. I'm not an active person who goes to church, although my partner is and a number of other people I have. But the one thing I would say is, one, I absolutely respect everyone's faith. And I don't delineate on what faith that is. There's loads of reasons why people are in different types of faith and religion. And faith can go beyond religion as well, but let's talk about the religious parts. I've been in countries in the world where people are in extremely challenging scenarios as families. They've really, really got nothing. And faith performs an absolute stalwart in their foundation of how they manage. And they manage incredibly well. They're brilliant people. You know, I've interacted with them as soldiers, you know, I've been their mentor, you know, we work together side by side. And I see how incredibly important faith can be in life, in everyday life. But I've also got extremely close friends who hit, and there's no such thing as rock bottom, right, in where you might go. Rock bottom is beyond the physical act of suicide, right? There is no such thing as rock bottom. But one of the most noticeable ways people have dealt with it is by becoming part of a faith community. And I've got one very, very close friend in mind. And that has been absolutely so critical to how he is today.
Yeah.
You know, so faith is something that becomes apparent, I think, more and more important, especially in our today's society. You know, we're fed off social media, and you know, the importance on the pillars of society and communities is getting slightly drowned out by noise. You have to concentrate very hard to. Now, I think it's something we need to sort of repoint to.
So I'm a big believer of faith being a cornerstone. For myself. You know, me before faith and me after faith, it completely changed me. It saved me, saved my marriage, saved me being a father, the way I am as a man. Yeah, so I 100% agree. I personally agree with you. Jon, I've acknowledged we've gone over time, but I've got one last question, and then let's open up for questions from our friends. So with everything that you've dealt with and everything that you've done, and for all the younger men that look up to men like you, how would you define strength? And what defines a man for you?
So I think to be a man in today's society, you know, it's actually much more challenging than it ever has done because of that noise that is around us. But for me, being a man in society is, one, you've got to acknowledge that what's important to people is security, it's safety. We share these things as whole communities. But specifically for males have very, very high suicide rates. They can be overly self-questioning in what their role is to perform. But essentially, if you lead and support in the way you naturally feel the inclination to do so, you will never, ever be far off. And one of the things I say about leadership, because everyone loves to tout leadership, they love to go into businesses and say leadership and coaching and mentoring is this, is leadership can sometimes be saying nothing and supporting an idea that didn't seem that great to you, but actually someone else needs you to get behind it and support it. Leadership can look very, very different in many, many different ways. But the key one is acceptance. And knowing yourself, not in a conscious way, not going, you know, I'm Jon and I like to do this and I pray that, but knowing within yourself that you are a human being who's born to survive. Your physiology is cued keenly in order to ensure that. And sometimes giving yourself over to that is what will see you through the hard times.
Jon, we could have gone deeper in each one of these topics. Again, we had to rush through them.
Well, so, I mean, the guilt of doing that is not the thing, right? When you do Special Forces operations, you'll return back to your home base at some point, often covered in someone else's blood, and infrequently covered in your own blood, right? You come back so tired that you feel hollowed out. You feel like you're having an out-of-body experience. So particular guilt that you are talking about is not really anything significant in the overall challenges that are presented in front of you. Exposure to trauma is. You know, and conflict is a challenging environment for everyone involved, but lots and lots of people get hurt who are also stuck in the middle. And being part of that, I've responded to plane crashes before, you know, where everyone has died on it. There's actually nothing identifiable about what it was to be an aircraft. You know, and we were there, you know, we were on the helicopter within 18 minutes of the Mayday call. So those are the things that are more challenging. But I don't think I've ever to be fair, I've never struggled with guilt and I've never struggled with regret. And I think that's really helped me out. In a Special Forces role, obviously what I always term our physicality as super medium. So we have to be good at so many things. Dragging a body 30 metres backwards as fast as you can. Wearing cage armour for 3 days, 4 days at a time. You sort of going without water and food for quite a long time. There's all of these things that build into your metabolism, your physicality, things that are actually hiding the amount of trauma that's building up. Also, more significantly, the amount of exposure to blast. You know, the times when you just can't sleep, which makes that exposure to trauma all the more complicated. When I served, there was no one way that they really had. And everyone selectively went to see the Padre. They selectively went to join a club. Since I've left, I believe they've brought BJJ into core. They've done other community efforts to help with that. Also, the Marines. The Marines are actually very, very intelligent force, and they started TRIM, which is Trauma Incident Management. And as soon as you have an instant exposure to a significant amount of trauma, then we start managing that directly now. And we're supposed to do that in teams. So now I believe every single person is trained. So they can, and the ultimate value is you can recognise it in yourself. Because people are incredibly good at covering all this up.
Masking.
Absolutely. And they're doing it deliberately, and they're probably doing it to protect their profession. They're probably, you know, everyone says, oh, it's because men are proud. Yeah, we all are proud. But you believe by admitting to something, admitting to like feeling fairly hopeless, overwhelmed and neurotic, is going to lead to you know, getting tugged in and into a counselling and a therapy profile, and everyone's really scared of that and those sorts of. So if you think there's a contention going on in there, which is if you go and see a therapist, you go and see a counsellor, you're going to get struck off. So from a cultural point of view, they have tried to address it. It's got a very long way to go. But also I'll mention we had the then leading UK psychologist visit and give us a brief, and they gave us a brief on Afghanistan, on Iraq, and the forces, you know, the US forces who served in Iraq. And they had those, I remember getting in the Strikers, they'd come and pick us up when their helicopters couldn't come and get us because there's a dust cloud, whatever, really, really hostile environments. So we'd say, oh, you know, how are we going to get out of here? And the striker brigades would come up. And a lot of those people were offered the university sponsorship. Do you remember when they said if you do a tour, you get your university paid for, but they could then redeploy you after 60 days. So, and I remember once, one pickup, the back ramp went down, there's always sort of loads of music, heavy metal going on in there and all sad in there, and we were just like, we are so grateful for coming and getting us. We really didn't want to get stuck there. And they'd be like, yeah, we'd say, you know, how's it been? You know, feeling slightly responsible for them being there, and like, yeah, we lost 2 vehicles, and you're just like, wow. You know, these guys are dealing with it on a daily basis. They're very, very young. So this psychologist was telling us about that sort of thing. And someone at the end of his talk said, what do you think is the instance amongst our community? And he was really interesting, and it's always stayed when he said, I think it's actually remarkably low whilst you're doing the job. Because you've been individually selected to do this. You've been through lots and lots of filters. You know, and I guess it's like that same comment, is whilst you're doing the job, the trauma is not the problem. The exposure to the mechanisms of blast and everything is, you know, but you are dealing quite well. I think one of the key mechanisms to people, effectively, the bubble going and bursting, or them falling off after they leave, is because that's been welling up. Right, and then it becomes unmanageable. And so I think it's like, you know, people share the same problems in human, they're just extremely pronounced in an SF community.
So awareness of the self, awareness of what you're going through, how you're changing and communicating it.
Yes. And you know, on our operations, on a third tour, it's 182 operations in 6 months. That's 182 on a helicopter, banging into an area, solving something, coming back. And in those times, it was all done at night because it's too dangerous in the day. So you can only imagine in that tempo, you're like, sort of people just, then they go home and sit there wondering why they wouldn't get up from the table. They can't communicate with people. They're completely inaccessible emotionally to their children. But gradually, I guess, as you mature, you learn to do that better. But a significant number don't. Make you realise what that could look like in pictures. We even have to be conscious and considerate around CrossFit, because CrossFit is all about sort of like big Olympic movements, and the guys are so competitive that they can, almost all of the injuries happen from poor technique and training. So yes, big egos are a risk. Usually not the egos that are the problem with them, it's the levels of competition they're prepared to go to. But it's not competition with one another, usually it's competition against the role that they've been set. But it's very dangerous and needs to be managed. And what we lead, as a TL, you look at it within your group, and if someone's ego is coming to the fore, you're like, look, we can't have this, because it can be very, very divisive. Being overly competitive with one another is not a good dynamic at all. So, but written into the ethos of the whole unit is a relentless pursuit of excellence, which speaks for itself. Classlessness, we don't wear rank. So we don't acknowledge, we know exactly who's important in our unit, we don't need to demonstrate it to others. We don't salute. I will salute other officers of other badge members because it's polite and courtesy. I don't have to salute my own officers. Self-discipline. Self-discipline isn't sort of discipline imposed, it's absolutely a core feature of how we do it. And humour and humility. And humility speaks for itself, right? You should be humble, and if you're not being humble, then you're out of queue. But the humour part is a really, really key part to how we behave. And you'll hear it noted, they're making jokes, whatever. And that is a core element of, if someone's ego gets too big, there'll always be a reality that chips them down to size. But everyone is reminded that we have to stick to our ethos. And I always used to say the quickest way of getting removed from this unit is from not adhering to the ethos, which keeps us all in check enough.
What if it's just different opinions, not even ego, but
Different opinions, and something happens on the ground, and the godfather of the person who made the decision is there, and they were killed, right? These things go on, and they are a reality to us. And when we're stood in the bar late at night, they can become extremely difficult to manage. And you have to sometimes go at it directly with the 2 individuals, 3 individuals, everyone is involved, and just try and rein them in. Because their propensity to compete, their propensity to bring it back up is very, very destructive for everyone around them. And ultimately, if you keep on behaving like that, you'll get removed. And it's a very fair process, and it's very upfront, but it is like, look, if you can't keep this in check, we have a duty to do here. It's not all about that, what you're good at. Right. Well, it's probably exactly the same as yours in that life is absolutely precious and needs upholding. Right. Certain professions require you to be in situations whether you're saving it or you're taking it, or both at any one time. I'm also a trained trauma medic, and I've been involved in lots of situations of trying to save people.
Like the plane crash.
Yeah, like the plane crash, and lots and lots of scenarios like that. So my approach to life is absolutely precious, and individually and personally when it's brought to an early close, especially when the person does it themselves, that's incredibly tragic. But when you look at life and what it can mean 20 years of illness at the end of it. So I don't get consumed by it all. But life is really, really important to everyone, and everyone you meet should be treasured and loved by lots of other people, right? But in certain situations, you join a side. You represent something. You're part of a tribe. You're part of a community, and sometimes you have to make decisions on behalf of that community. Everything is good for you. Like slightly smaller portion sizes, eating good food, ice baths, or just turn your shower to cold. Go to the gym if you need to, train outside, but train and move, physicality. They're all important. They lie in the physical space. And then maintaining your body is sleep. But also never ignoring that being social, interacting, being part of a community, and treating the people you love right, as well. And if you're going to go and live in a gym, I think you're going to wear your relationship, unless it's your job, you're going to wear that relationship pretty thin if you're in the gym every 4 o'clock every morning, right? So ensuring that all of those good traits are done, they only need to be done to 70%. No one needs to be fighting fit all the time, not in this room or any other room, right? So be 70% of all of those. Be super medium. Do all of these well, but never ever forget that relationships and the people you care about are the biggest cost that you can put. You know, and I love going to the gym or whatever. You know, I don't get in the gym early in the morning anymore because I also love my relationships and being social and being accessible. I still don't see my children that much, you know, but when I've got the time or the place to do it, and I have one rule when we separated, it's like when they call, you'll make yourself accessible, drop everything, go. Now you can't do that to the nth degree, work's work. But that was the principle. So I think everything you're talking about, you're right about cold water therapy, but actually if you just turn your shower to cold.
That's good enough. Jon, you said something interesting to me a few days ago. You said you disagree with following blindly mantras. So these, that you would get these social traits or trends saying, oh, cold showers or cold ice baths, or train, you know, super early in the morning, or intermittent fasting and so on, and people take it to a mantra. It becomes like an obsession. You're trying to biohack or hack your life. What Jon and I have been communicating is breathe, just relax, enjoy a bit of this, enjoy a bit of that, do it consistently, but don't make it into this thing that takes over. I have to do it because that's what defines me and therefore I'll get success. It doesn't work that way.
No.
Yeah.
Balance.
That was a great point. Guys, thank you. Everyone, thank you. Thank you for your patience. And Roger, thank you for everything. And Jon, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.